Alaska is known for its breathtaking landscapes, vast wilderness, and unforgiving terrain. But deep within its frozen expanse lie secrets and stories that are far more chilling than the icy winds that blow through its forests. Today, I'm going to share with you my encounter with something ancient and malevolent in the remote Alaskan wilderness, an experience that has haunted me ever since. I've always been an outdoors enthusiast, drawn to the solitude and beauty of nature. So when I got the chance to visit Alaska, I couldn't resist. I had planned a solo trip to the remote backcountry, eager to spend a week hiking through the untouched wilderness. I wanted to see the real Alaska, far from any towns or other people. I'd done my research, prepared all my gear, and felt ready for whatever nature could throw at me. I flew into a small town and hired a bush pilot to drop me off in the middle of nowhere. The pilot was a grizzled old man who had lived in Alaska his entire life. As we flew over the endless expanse of snow-covered forests and mountains, he turned to me and said, "You be careful out here. These woods have a way of swallowing people whole." I laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to scare the tourist, but there was something in his voice that unnerved me. He dropped me off at a remote clearing with my pack and gear, then took off, leaving me alone with the vast wilderness stretching out in every direction. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the distant call of a raven. I set up camp and spent the day hiking and exploring, feeling a sense of freedom and excitement that only the wilderness can provide. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia. After all, I was alone in one of the most isolated places on Earth. But that night, as I lay in my tent, I heard something strange. A faint whispering carried on the wind, just outside the fabric of my tent. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but the whispering continued, growing louder, almost like a chant. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent, shining the beam into the darkness. There was nothing there, just the silent trees swaying in the wind. I went back inside, trying to calm myself down, and eventually fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, I decided to brush off the strange experience from the night before. The sun was shining, and I had a full day of exploring ahead of me. I packed up my gear and set off deeper into the forest. The landscape was breathtaking, towering pines, snow-capped peaks, and crystal-clear streams. But as the day wore on, I began to notice strange things. I found tracks in the snow, large, deep footprints that didn't belong to any animal I knew of. They were human-like but much larger, as if something massive had walked through the area. I followed the tracks for a while, curiosity getting the better of me. But after a few hundred yards, they just stopped. No signs of turning back or continuing forward, just a dead end in the middle of a clearing. I stood there for a moment trying to make sense of it. How could something just vanish into thin air? That's when I heard it again, the whispering faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere nearby. My heart began to race as I spun around, looking for the source. The whispering grew louder, but no matter which way I turned, it always seemed to be just out of reach. I decided it was time to head back to camp. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, and I didn't want to be caught out in the dark. As I made my way back, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like something was following me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. By the time I reached my camp, the sun had set, and the forest was bathed in darkness. I built a fire, hoping it would chase away whatever fear was gnawing at me. But as the flames crackled and the shadows danced around me, I heard it again, the whispering, now louder and closer than ever. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the warmth of the fire and the stars above. But then I saw them, figures moving just beyond the firelight, darting between the trees. They were tall, much taller than any person, with elongated limbs and glowing eyes. They moved in and out of the shadows with an unnatural grace, watching me. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it towards them, but as soon as the light hit them, they vanished. I sat there, frozen in fear, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I knew I wasn't alone. The whispering grew louder, and the figures began to circle my camp, staying just out of reach of the light. I could feel their eyes on me, their gaze piercing through the darkness. I knew I had to leave, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the ground in terror. Suddenly, one of the figures stepped into the light. It was tall and thin, its skin a sickly pale color that seemed to almost glow in the firelight. Its eyes were hollow and black, staring right through me. It opened its mouth, and the whispering grew deafening, echoing inside my skull. In a panic, I grabbed my pack and ran, bolting into the darkness of the forest. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. The whispering followed me, growing louder and more insistent with every step. I could hear the figures moving behind me, their footsteps silent but unmistakable. I ran for what felt like hours, my lungs burning and my legs aching. I stumbled through the darkness, tripping over roots and branches, but I didn't dare stop. The whispering was inside my head now, filling my mind with images of death and despair. I knew I couldn't outrun them forever, but I had to try. Eventually, I saw a light in the distance, a small cabin, barely visible through the trees. I sprinted towards it, my last bit of energy pushing me forward. I burst through the door and slammed it shut behind me, collapsing onto the floor in exhaustion. The cabin was empty, abandoned long ago by the looks of it. I quickly barricaded the door with whatever I could find and sat in the darkness, listening. The whispering had stopped, and I could no longer hear the footsteps outside. I thought maybe, just maybe, I was safe. But then I heard it, a soft tapping on the window. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. There, standing just outside the glass, was one of the figures. It stared at me with those hollow eyes, a thin smile spreading across its face. I knew then that I was never going to leave this place. It'd been in this cabin for 3 days now, or maybe it's been longer. I've lost all sense of time. The figures are still out there waiting for me. The whispering never stops, always just at the edge of my hearing, reminding me that they're there. I don't know what they want, but I know they're not going to let me go. If you're hearing this, please stay away from the Alaskan wilderness. There are things out here that don't belong in our world, things that will follow you to the ends of the earth. And once they have you, they'll never let you go.